In the future, the corporation you work for will be more important than the country you live in. But even more important will be the type of job you have. All of that according to Harvard economist Robert Reich. He joins us now to talk about those ideas and what's next for the world economy. We'll also be taking your phone calls at 1-800-245-9638. 1-800-245-9638. I welcome an old friend, Robert Reich. Good to have you.
Great to see you,
Thank
Charlie.
You. The worth of nations. Make the point you were making, though, about this conversation. You've sat watching the rest of the show.
Sitting watching the show. I mean, the unifying theme here is basically frustration, anger, cynicism. The bottom 3/5 of Americans, in terms of the workforce and incomes, have been going downhill for the last 15 years.
The bottom 3/5.
Bottom 3/5. In fact, real incomes, if you're in the bottom 3/5 of the American income ladder, your real income has declined over the past 15 years by 12%.
And the bottom 3/5 include what two categories of people?
It includes the poor, the working class, the lower middle class, and a lot of the middle class, the old middle class. But it means that the old mythology, the old belief of upward mobility is really not necessarily true anymore. And that frustration, Charlie, that anger, that sense of, my children may not have it as well as I do, I can't hold on anymore, I've done everything I can. For a lot of Americans, it does express itself in anger against politicians, against the rich, against the Japanese, and for some, anger against blacks and others. David Duke becomes the
economic
possibility.
Security frequently leads to a kind of lashing out.
Well, economic insecurity,
irrationally.
Absolutely, particularly if it goes on for a while. I mean, you were talking to Father Healy about public libraries closing down, about poor. The whole thing is a phenomenon that we are living in right now, and a lot of Americans don't realize it. It goes beyond the recession. It goes beyond the recession. We can come out of the recession, but we still have this long-term economic problem.
I want to talk about the work of nations, but first, size up the political discourse so far. I mean, are you an advisor to Governor Clinton?
I advise anybody who calls. In fact, believe it or not,
wait a minute,
believe it or not, 3 weeks ago, somebody from the White House came to my office seeking advice, which is a sure sign of the desperation
what do you mean?
that they are finding.
If a Republican would come to you,
if a Republican goes to me, where they
what
are
did they
really
want to know?
The question was a low-level staffer,
right.
But the question was, what do we do about the recession?
And what'd you say?
George Bush is going crazy. I mean, he's got to do something. I think that the way out of this recession, very clearly, is it's not to lower interest rates, and it's not to
not monetary policy,
and it's not to get on the banks and get them to loan. That's like pushing on a wet noodle, because there's no demand at the other side. What you have to do.
What you think
is
is create consumer demand. Create consumer demand.
Well, you get consumer confidence is the key. I mean, consumers all over America now are worried stiff. Every time somebody loses his job, consumers say, my gosh, that could be me. I have a mortgage. I have enormous debt.
And I can't buy the car that I wanted because I'm worried about keeping my job. I'm worried about paying the mortgage. I'm worried about putting my kids in school.
What happens if I lose my job? I have no health insurance. So that lack of consumer confidence builds up, and it means no buying. Nobody buys consumer durables, and the whole economy begins to collapse. And right now, the biggest issue is lack of consumer confidence. Now, how do you build up consumer confidence? You give them extended unemployment insurance.
Well, they just signed on that. The president just agreed
and that's fine. That's a good step. Should have happened a long time ago. You give them some sort of hope with regard to national health insurance, some sort of health insurance cushion. You do have a public works program. I mean, everybody knows that you need
but everybody
roads
doesn't
and bridges.
Believe in that, and I tell you why. Clearly, we need to build the infrastructure of this country. At long last, we need to focus on it in the urban areas and across the country in terms of highways and a lot of other things.
Everybody's in traffic jams. You know the thing is
we know we need to do that. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who will step forward, economists, and say public works projects are not the way to go because it doesn't last. I mean,
don't listen to economists, Charlie. I used to tell you. You learned that lesson long ago. Come on.
So why would public works be the right way to go?
Because number one, it doesn't take a great deal of training.
Cuomo believes you, by the way, because he's trying to create it in his own economic
problem. You can get people right on board to do it. Our roads and bridges are coming apart. You do need to
So it creates jobs, and therefore those people who have the new revenue will be able to go spend that money, and therefore cause other businesses to provide products.
It also creates investments for the future. I mean, everybody knows that our infrastructure. We haven't built a new airport since 1973 in this country, and if you have a country, every other nation.
I thought they built one in Denver.
They add a little incrementally. Every other country is investing like mad in education, infrastructure, training, building up its workforce. This book is all about the fact that what's left of an economy. Every other factor of production moves around the world, companies, technologies. The only thing that's left, people, their brains, their training, and infrastructure, the roads and bridges and everything else.
And you're arguing in this book that the national boundaries are less significant, that giant corporations and those group of people who you call what? The system...
Symbolic analysts.
Symbolic analysts. Those group of people are the people who will benefit most from the future,
well,
and will most be in a position to reap the benefits of the new economic structures.
The top 20% of income earners in this country, before taxes, over the last 15 years, has seen their real incomes increase by 9%. Now remember I said the bottom 3/5 going down, top 1/5 going up. Why? Because the global economy is really pulling people apart, acting like a centrifugal force. If you're skilled, if you're a conceptualizer, if you're a problem solver, the new world economy creates a bigger and bigger market. Works for your advantage. But if you don't have skills in the new global economy, you are competing with millions and millions of people the world over, the vast majority of whom would be delighted to work for a small fraction of your prevailing wages. So that creates an enormous problem. One more, while I get it in, one more way to get out of the current crisis before I get into the lease. IRAs. Suppose we said tomorrow...
Everybody's jumping on that bandwagon, but go ahead.
Is that right? I thought this was my idea.
No.
You've heard it from somebody else?
Yes, but go ahead.
Oh, well, they heard it from me.
To do what with IRAs?
Well, if you simply said to people that you can immediately, without any tax penalty, take anything out of your IRA, and you pay taxes on it only if you don't put it in within the next 2 years. In other words, you're taking it out to stimulate the economy, and you are, over the next 2 years, putting it back, rebuilding savings. That's exactly what we need.
I thought the idea was to create savings, and that's what the American economy needed.
You do. And
that's why higher savings rate.
But the arrangement I just gave you would create an incentive to put it back in, because you wouldn't pay taxes if you put it back in.
You wouldn't pay a penalty to take it out.
So obviously the answers, the ideas you heard were not as sophisticated.
Of course not. Let me take some phone calls. Robert Reich is here. The Work of Nations is his book, and we'll talk more about that, but go ahead. You're with Robert Reich, Professor Reich.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Reich, you just touched on something, and I'm going to say something that's going to be kind of unpopular, but I think what you just said was very dangerous. You talked about the top 20% of the people in this country, the rich, who have done well over the last 10 years, and you said something about like a centrifugal force and momentum and so forth. I think that takes blame away. I think people like President Bush and the rich people who really run things in this country, there's this myth in the media, because maybe they go to cocktail parties with the media and stuff, that these are good people and that they don't really mean what they say and everything. I think these are evil people. They couldn't care less about the poor. They couldn't care less about the people working in sugar fields in other countries who are like slaves.
Well, my only point is that if you simply look at the top 20% in terms of their skills and education, the gap between the college-educated and the non-college educated in terms of their wages is growing. In fact, if 1980, if you were college-educated, on average you had real wages about 36% above people who were non-college educated. 1992, your wages on average, college-educated, are about 63% higher than the non-college educated. That's the gap that's growing. This is before taxes. What you're saying has to do with what's happening to taxes and the regressiveness of the taxes. That's probably true. I'm saying that even without taxes, you're seeing the world economy having that kind of an impact.
Thanks for calling. You're on with Professor Robert Reich. Go ahead.
Thank you, Charlie, very much. Incidentally, I do enjoy your show, and I happen to see it often since I'm unemployed. I watch you in the afternoon as well. But very quickly, Professor, could you put in perspective Reaganomics, the Laffer theory, and the trickle-down approach? Conservative colleagues would hasten to suggest that worked very well, and the only problem was the largesse in the spending of Congress that created this deficit. And also, beyond that answer, what do we do now?
Well, trickle-down economics really doesn't work. The Laffer curve, supply-side economics, does work extremely well for the very rich. But what we have seen in the 1980s, and we see certainly in the 1990s, is that instead of trickle-down, you have trickle-out. That is, wealthy savings, the savings of anybody, goes around the world wherever they can get the highest return. There's no reason to suppose that the savings of the wealthy actually are reinvested here. Indeed, what we saw in the 1980s, despite all the predictions for supply-side economics, is that there wasn't much of an increase in investment at all in the private sector. Putting to one side the huge deficit in the public sector, there was no substantial increase over the 1970s in the amount of private sector investment. And so, basically, supply-side economics, trickle-down economics was one of those rare, unfortunate economic theories to have been tried out in practice.
And the new rallying cry, the new rallying cry for supply-side economists is we need a capital gains cut in order to produce and stimulate more investment, to create more jobs, and to continue economic growth.
I wouldn't object to a capital gains tax cut on this basis, Charlie. If you said, if you hold your asset for more than 6 years, if you're a patient capitalist, yeah, you have a very, very low capital gains rate. But if you hold
Not even that. You're suggesting that if you hold your asset for 6 years, you pay no capital gains tax on it.
I wouldn't even object to that.
But no, you're not objecting to it. Aren't you arguing that?
Well, I would like a 3-tier capital gains system. In
And,
other words,
if you have a 3-tier and you hold it over 6 years, how much would you tax it?
Well, with regard to indexing, you could actually get it down to 0.
That's what I thought.
Absolutely right. But don't quote me. But if you hold it for less than 6 months, if you are an impatient, if you're just a speculator, you have a huge capital gains rate.
So you want to, in fact, provide a disincentive to speculation.
I want to provide a disincentive to speculation. So in other words, one of the big problems with the capital gains tax reduction is it just makes the speculators even richer.
We're going to do this again, but I want to come to this. Have you changed your idea about the new industrial policy? Because one of the times that we talked in a number of conversations, you were arguing about we needed to, in a multinational way, we need to really support and create help corporations by tax cuts and a lot of other things.
Well, a dozen years ago, I thought it probably made sense
for American so-called new industrial policy
for American business and labor to join together in the new global economy. But over the last 10 years, what has happened? American businesses have gone global.
Yeah. And now you're arguing the emphasis ought to be on individuals, ought to be on human capital,
education and training. And what we've done over the last 10 years is disinvested.
I'm out of time. The Work of Nations, Robert Reich. He'll be back whenever he comes to New York, and we'll talk more, take more phone calls. Join me tomorrow when my guest includes Sally Quinn. Also here will be comedian Jackie Mason, and perhaps some others. We'll take a look at a number of things that are breaking, and one of those subjects will be treated here on this broadcast tomorrow, Friday night. Have a lovely evening. We'll see you tomorrow night. My thanks again to all the guests. Bye.